Good evening, everyone. Tonight's meeting is a council workshop at 6:30, and we have two items on the agenda. And the first one, we have LD 2003, and then we are doing the council goal setting. So first up, we have Emily Cole Prescott.
Hi, everyone. So while this is preparing, the goal of my presentation tonight is to just give you a high-level overview of LD 2003, as well as how LD 2003 fits into our existing comp plan goals. So, Councilor Johnston, you may need to turn around. Thank you. So this is a promising start to the presentation.
There you go. Do you need some assistance? Do we have someone in the back or?
No, it's just frozen.
Maybe Emily?
Okay.
Roy?
Hold on just 1 minute.
Just give Nate a hammer. He can pound on it.
It's our computer.
Okay, are we ready? I can tell you I'm ready now, I think.
Yeah.
So whenever we look at policies, we try to look at the local and national context. And when we look at Saco, we have a history of various housing types. In 2021, we did a lot of work on our ordinance revisions, which allow for housing variety to continue throughout the city, which is great. We updated the comp plan, and that well aligns with the state housing goals that we're now seeing coming out of the state of Maine. So in many ways, Saco is well positioned to make sure that we're complying with LD 2003 and to welcome a variety of people and provide a lot of housing options. The main context, many of you heard, I know there was a November 2022 workshop with fellow planning board members, so thank you, Alyssa and Matt, for joining us tonight, where we talked about what's going on in Maine with LD 2003, which is going to encourage more affordable housing options. It's going to require communities to allow 2.5 times the density for affordable housing projects. It's going to require additional accessory dwelling units throughout the city. It will require up to 4 dwelling units in growth areas throughout the city. And then we will have a rule process going on for LD 2003, which is implementation is underway. So there'll be a public hearing from the DECD's office on March 1st to go over the rulemaking process. So there's going to be more to follow on the state level as well as to how the LD 2003 law will be implemented throughout rulemaking. Throughout that, we will see that some funding may be available to communities. I know many of you have received some emails about rulemaking and then potentially funding. It would be a low dollar amount. I think Saco could probably be well equipped with the staff we have to not have to tap into funding, but it is an opportunity that could be there. And then nationally, just so we have the context of what's going on federally, we do have missing middle housing that's happening all throughout the country. We talked a lot about that during the comp plan update and the long-range planning committee with our consultants. And then the federal government has announced that they'll have a housing supply action plan, and there'll be higher scores for communities that have future grant funding that will be targeted toward locations that offer affordable housing. So Saco will be better equipped in the future for grant funding if we actually comply with LD 2003 and offer more affordable housing. Our comp plan goals recap. A lot of our goals are interrelated. Resiliency and sustainability is critical throughout the comp plan, and we also rely on that regional coordination piece. So there'll be regional coordination, there'll be opportunity to maintain resiliency and sustainability throughout the ordinances we currently have on the books, and a lot of the rules that you'll see are going to be interrelated with how we can update our ordinance standards. Some comp plan goals on housing. Housing to meet resident budget and needs was a comp plan goal. Greater density housing in areas with sewer and water was a comp plan goal. Development near walkable locations and also bikeability, and we've been hearing a lot about that from our Bike Ped Advisory Committee. And then improving the existing housing stock. Overall, our comp plan called for a variety of housing options to retain and welcome people of all ages, incomes, lifestyles, and backgrounds as members of our community. We also want to look at what residents have told us. Residents have said that in our comp plan that we want to refurbish and renovate existing housing. We want to add units where supportive infrastructure exists, such as in the downtown or areas that have public sewer and water. We want to add second-story units to downtown historic buildings and remove the barriers to those conversions. Discourage subdivision, if possible, of agricultural lands. And then we want to look to our design standards and make sure that what we're approving is what our citizens and residents want, and then what our future citizens and residents would like to live in. And then, of course, we've been hearing about traffic, which we've all experienced. LD 2003 looks to Saco's growth areas and specifically to growth locations in the comp plan. Most of our comp plan calls out all of the city for growth. There's specific growth areas and then limited growth areas. What I'm going to be looking at is the growth areas here. So those are the areas that I believe LD 2003 will apply. You okay over there? All right, good. So as we can see, there's a lot of shared state and local housing goals between LD 2003 as well as the comp plan, which are to prioritize density in growth areas with sewer and water, encouraging housing variety that is affordable, and conserving natural resources. It's important to note that LD 2003 does not limit the city's ability to still conserve and protect natural resources. A lot of the permitting processes that we have, at least at the planning department level and the planning board level, will still be applicable. So how do we comply with the new law? I took a lot of deep dive into some sections of our ordinance relative to what we have so far in LD 2003, and this is really just meant to be a high-level overview. But we will need to make revisions to the following sections of our ordinance, which are accessory dwelling units. So Saco has done a good job already complying with a lot of where the state is headed. Right now we allow accessory dwelling units in most areas of the city, and the 2021 ordinance revision we have allowed those units to be detached as well as attached. So one of the revisions we'll need to make to comply with the law is to specify that accessory dwelling units have to be at least 190 square feet in size, we can still keep our maximum size of 800 square feet that we have now. Additionally, we will need to update ADU provisions to ensure that ADUs are allowed everywhere housing is allowed, and every single-family residence has the option of adding one ADU. Most of our zones already allow this, so it's not going to be a far stretch. We'll have to look at density bonuses for affordable housing in growth areas. The law calls for 2.5 times the density of the area. Right now, Saco already has an elderly density bonus provision, which is 1.5 times the density in certain zones. A lot of applicants do not tap into it, but we can certainly use that elderly density bonus as a starting path and expand it and make it applicable to affordable housing projects. As far as affordable housing, we'll need to incorporate the state's definition of affordable housing into the local ordinance. And then we'll need to incorporate provisions into monitoring compliance with affordable housing standards, making sure that restrictions put on affordable housing are kept in place for at least 30 years as the law requires. We'll also need to look at parking, so we'll need to make sure that we're not requiring more parking spaces for accessory dwelling units. We can only require the number of parking spaces for single-family residences now, so there'll be a few changes to that. And we should update our parking standards anyway for several other reasons. Right now, we have a lot of maximum parking requirements that wind up with more impervious coverage and development than we really need. We'll have to take a look at single-family residential zoning and make sure that additional units, dwelling units, are allowed wherever single-family homes are allowed. We'll need to review our permitted and conditional uses relative to housing to make sure that we are allowing number of units on single-family residential lots by right and not by conditional use. I'm recommending that we revise our master plan development concept into a mixed-use development concept and make clear information for everyone so that it can be used moving forward to help with affordable housing projects. And then overall, the intent of the law and any compliance with it is that we do not make standards or ordinance revisions that prohibit housing that LD 2003 allows. And then when we make these ordinance revisions, let's look at what our community has told us. Let's not just focus on compliance with a law for compliance with a law. Let's take a look at buffering standards where we can, where uses mix. Let's work with city departments to gather data on development impacts and report out through a growth monitoring system so that council can look to the future when it's making budget decisions. Let's try to reduce our barriers to upper-level historic downtown conversions, which has been a long time item on the list. I'm recommending that we complete a traffic infrastructure study and figure out how we can best mitigate traffic moving forward. One aspect of this is looking at a traffic impact fee like Scarborough has. Reviewing existing ordinance options, such as the elderly density bonus, and applying it to affordable, like we just talked about, and then basically assessing the level of compliance needed and reporting back to council. We won't know right away how much compliance is needed because we won't know how many affordable housing units are coming online right away. Examples from LD 2003 guidance, some of this you probably saw in the guidance document that I put in, linked into the memo. Basically, the top picture shows you what is not permitted, so you can allow a single-family home, an ADU, but you cannot allow one more parking space just for the ADU. So those 3 units have to have just the required parking can only be up to what the single-family allows or requires per our ordinance. So that's one example of a somewhat minor parking ordinance change that we would need to make. And then the example to the right shows that an empty lot can have up to 4 dwelling units if it's shown in a growth area. So we saw the growth areas earlier from the comp plan map, and also has ability to be served by public sewer and water as verified by the Public Water Company and by the Saco WRD. There's other pictures in the guidance document, and that's interim guidance, so we'll know more once rulemaking comes out. So some considerations for Saco as we move forward is greater compliance monitoring will be needed to make sure that we're going to have to start checking to make sure that sales happen. Once affordable housing projects go online, we're going to need to make sure the deeds have the right restrictions and covenants so that they're sold to people who are eligible for the affordable status. Probably planning department will be the one to undertake this because we're already checking some of these items for other policies and paperwork and conditions of approval that we are reviewing as part of the planning board process. It's important to note that neighboring communities will be providing their own ordinance revisions to be similar, so we might not get an influx of housing because you're going to be having Scarborough and Biddeford do similar things, and Biddeford's already doing a lot with affordable housing. ADUs will most likely become more popular options. I would definitely say that that will hold true. I think, Alyssa, I see your head nodding over here. We're going to need to have some education for all land use development staff to understand the state law, ordinance implementation, and any new revisions to our ordinances that come forward. We want to make sure we're all on one page as staff, which we're pretty collaborative, so I don't think that'll be too much of a heavy lift, but it's just something to consider. The path forward, education and information, like this presentation today, I hope it was helpful. Ordinance revisions to make sure that we're in compliance, and then do we want to look at affordable housing incentives? And then some next steps, we have the city administrator creating the Affordable Housing Committee for staff. Ordinance revisions, we can start relatively soon. We have money set aside from ARPA funds for a housing action plan, and then I'm recommending a traffic infrastructure study citywide to look at the traffic impacts and how those can be mitigated. So any questions, and thank you for listening, and thanks for dealing with the technology delay.
Open discussion, so anybody, you don't have to be called on, just feel free to throw out your questions.
Yeah, I guess I have a few questions. So I recognize very strongly the need for more affordable housing. I'm actually in favor of this ordinance and bill. I think it'll have positive effects on Maine, help bring in the workers we need. It's going to do a lot of good. But I worry, too, about some of the short-term consequences. And you already spoke a lot about traffic. I know that's a big concern in my ward. I'm also wondering about the rate of building and whether that's going to put some pressure on code enforcement and inspection and how that gets handled. I'm also was a little unclear on the link between affordable housing and these accessory dwelling units, and whether affordable housing somehow intersects with that, or whether the affordable housing benefits were just to new construction on lots that currently have 0 dwelling units. Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about some of those things.
Should I respond? Are we doing it back and forth? Or okay. So as far as the link to affordable housing and ADUs are going to be allowed throughout the city. The link is really not so much, so the 2.5 times density bonus applies to affordable housing projects that get proposed. The ADUs, and I think the reason why they're in the law is because ADUs have traditionally been seen as a way to foster affordable spaces, because a lot of the times you might have families creating smaller spaces for their relatives to live in, whether or not that's someone downsizing because they don't need a large space anymore and their family takes over the main home, or there's difference in living situations and they can move from one unit to the other. So they've been considered a way, traditionally through land use development, to help spur living in one area and aging in place. As far as the rate of building, I think it's a good question. One thing that I will say about this is there's a lot more yet to come with the rules and implementation. So at one point there was more restrictions on what communities could and could not do. We will still have the full site plan review and subdivision review authority. And we're also going to be required as a city to look at LID, low impact development standards. So there's going to be some coordination of policies going forward where we might be able to implement some better smart growth opportunities. And then as far as traffic, we really have not answered a lot of some of the questions that remain on our traffic impact and sidewalk impact fees, and that's why I'm recommending that we really dive into that and work with a traffic consultant, traffic engineering consultant who specializes in this work, so we can actually get a formula for traffic impacts and get some impact fees that are citywide, that have a nexus of understanding of why we're charging them.
And we can attach some of those impact fees to accessory dwelling units, or no?
I think that would be to be determined based on what the study would result in.
Thank you.
You had talked about reducing the barriers for the historic downtown district. Is there a plan or possibly a plan going forward that the city would be working with HPC? Because they basically are the barrier with, you know, what's required and everything, if people are coming in doing renovations, buying, adding on. So I would think the city would want to make sure that they were involving HPC with that, to make sure what the policies are in place for people coming in and kind of making it easier. If you did have somebody wanting to come in and renovate one of the areas or add onto it. So that would be my suggestion for that.
I think that's a good suggestion. I mean, the other thing that maybe I didn't clarify completely in here was we have a lot of standards that prohibit the ability of converting interior floor space to multifamilies. So maybe looking at those barriers as well. So not just exterior, but interior barriers.
I was curious about, pardon me, the city administrators mentioned up there about the this committee for affordable housing. Now, who's going to be on the committee? Is it going to be recommending where and what composition? Can you give us a little more specifics about how that plays into this?
Yeah, so like I announced about a month ago in my report, about 6 weeks ago maybe, this is going to be a staff-level committee to look at proposals out there, to vet proposals, to look at some different ideas, maybe some actual specific projects the city could look at getting involved with, and bring forward recommendations to the council, or planning board and council, of what we could do, what's feasible, what might make sense for Saco. And so really just their initial vetting of proposals and recommendations for them to council and planning board to carry forward with.
So you had presented some recommendations. Which ones are a must that need to be completed before the law goes into effect, and which ones can be completed over time to best protect the city and its growth, in any capacity that you can think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. For accessory dwelling units, we definitely need to look at those right away to make sure we're in compliance. I think that's actually going to be the most requested initially. We definitely would need to adopt the affordable housing definition from the state law, as well as adopting the density requirements. We would need to do parking, and then some of these other provisions, like we could not put conditional uses on multifamilies, but we could certainly still review multifamilies under site plan if the site required us to do that, and usually that threshold is 10,000 square feet of impact. So I'd say at least the first few. It's not a requirement to update master plan development to mixed-use concepts for compliance with the law. It's just a recommendation that we should look at it.
Because again, we have, what are we, 4 months? All of March, all of April, May, and June. So, I mean, that's a lot of work to do for both. Again, I don't know what would have to go to planning first before it comes to us, but 4 months in our world, especially when you have the joint planning city council, that is a short period of time. So.
It is, and we're also still waiting for final rulemaking from the state. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that, yes, there will be a July 1 implementation date, but really a lot of communities are going to be in the same situation we are, where compliance will be, I think, over time.
Kind of seems to me that, I mean, anything that's in the pipeline now really isn't going to be affected by this. It would seem to me that if a developer wants to build affordable housing, I mean, it's going to have to be presented that way through the planning board process, et cetera. I mean, with the, say a developer right now, I'm looking at the, this one section here where it says, a developer would be eligible to build 6 units, but with the new rules, he'd be eligible to build 15 units. I mean, they can't just turn on a dime and do that. So, I mean, they've already got their plans in place and everything. But, so, like I said, I'm just saying, it seems to me that this isn't going to be a deluge of new plans. It's all gonna have to go through the process and be presented to the city in that form. Am I correct in that thinking?
Yeah, most everything will still go through a planning board process. There will be units that are built where single-family housing is allowed now that do not need to go through a planning board process. So you might see additional units where you might have seen a conditional use review or something before. But no, if we're talking about the larger affordable projects, those would all come through a planning board review, especially because most of them would be impacting 10,000 square feet anyway. And a developer could technically have affordable housing project right now, propose it as housing, just not want a density bonus, bring it forward as housing, and then decide that they just want to have it as affordable for a little bit. But in order to get the density bonus, they need to follow the restrictive provisions of the law.
It seems to me, just responding to Councilor Purdy, that the 2 areas that might impact us most quickly is the ability to build additional units on empty lots, where now we would expect 1 unit. We could have up to 4, if I understand it, if nothing's been built, requiring no additional approval by the city. And so that's an area where we might see some rapid growth and change. And then the accessory dwelling units that can now be attached to any house, right, or maybe up to 2 that can be attached to any existing unit, could also be a fairly rapid growth in some areas. I think my ward is particularly concerned about that. And that also wouldn't require any additional approval by the city. So in some areas, I think you have a fairly rapid increase in density without it going through very many processes, right?
So the ADUs would go through building permit process as they do now, but I will share with you, Councilor Berman, that our ward has the ability to have ADUs just like this as it is now. So I could put up an ADU at my house tomorrow as long as I got a building permit. So really, some of this is already allowed, and I'd be happy to kind of do a comparison document for wards if it would be helpful to councilors to talk with people about like what zoning is in what ward that would change.
I think that would be pretty helpful, actually. Yeah.
That's what I was actually thinking. I mean, I've gone through this myself and, tried to apply it to each zone. And again, not comprehensively by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, I came up with largely it's LDR and the MDR that currently under this would now be allowing multifamily, which is a significant change for Ward 4. And I guess, I think, overall, I think we're supportive of these changes, but there are going to be people out there that are going to wake up one day very surprised from just going through the zoning map and or parcel lots and figuring out how many units I could put on there now. So I would, agree with Councilor Berman as far as much information we can get out to the public about how it impacts them now. The better, because I do envision some upset stomachs. Additionally, and I don't know how much this comes into play or if it does. I mean, in my mind it does, but I think we should be considering, and I've brought this up over the last 5 years, the short-term rental ordinance needs to be in place, because there are areas you might think that wouldn't be, but all you have to do is go on Airbnb or any of those other sites and you'll see that it's happening now and it's unregulated, and there's entire subdivisions that has single-family homes that you'd be shocked at what they're renting those out for. And if the intent of this law is to increase affordable housing or housing in general, I think taking a accessory units or additional units, and having them utilize a short term kind of defeats that purpose. So we should be considering that at the same time we're making these changes. So I would advocate for that. Thank you.
Well, along that line, too, if we see an increase in ADUs, and you're building an ADU for your elderly parent, they pass or go to a nursing home, now you have this ADU, what do you do with it? Are they gonna start Airbnb-ing it out? Is it gonna be a rental? You know, so if, looking at those requirements as well, after that fact, and that comes into play with getting the short-term rental ordinances
But
in place, because you're gonna, if they have an influx and all of a sudden we have all these people, you know, hey, we got empty ADUs, what do we do with them? They're gonna wanna rent them out.
yeah, and I think long ago, 20 years ago, when these ADUs came about, that was the intent. It was to have your parents move back in, have your college kids come home. But in the last 5 to 10 years, those ADUs are throughout Saco, and they certainly don't have family members in them. They've just become apartments. And again, depending on how this, is applied, I can see a whole bunch of apartments popping up all over the city that never had it, and maybe that's a good thing, but I also know the unintended consequences of those. I mean, as I said, from my perspective, this has little impact to my ward. It already allows, units in excess of 8, but I can certainly look around at fellow councilors' wards and see how this could have some pretty significant impacts, not just to neighborhoods, but infrastructure. So I think we need to be cognizant of that.
So Councilor Johnson brings up a good point, because, again, if you make an ADU and it's not for your family, that doesn't bother me. If you're renting it, it creates more units available for people to rent. So in the end, that still helps with housing affordability. I'm concerned on the ones where the ADU is specifically, and I didn't think of this, ADU is specifically created for Airbnb. If you have a nice view, you have a nice scenery, you have something marketable related to a view, and the true intent of this ADU is not to make an apartment or for your parents. So how do we control that? How do we, I mean, you can't say if you can make an ADU, you can make an ADU. We don't ask for a purpose, correct?
No, we don't ask for a purpose, and we probably couldn't under law, but there are ways that you can regulate short-term rentals. That's really falls more to the code enforcement department, so I will pass this along, have a conversation with Dave Toomey, and then we can follow up through the city administrator.
And that's where I was getting at with it. It's happening now. I know several people in the downtown area that have been forced out of what was an apartment and is now an AD or a Airbnb unit. Because they, again, economically, the property owner can make far more than renting it, monthly. And it's happening. It's been happening for, like I said, 5 years ago was the first time I heard of it, and I went to codes with it, and it was, I've told you this story. It was, well, let's wait and see approach, and I waited 5 years. So this is definitely something that I'm concerned with. And that's what I would see really largely happening. You're going to see people say, I'll add that ADU and I'll get $150 a night. And it doesn't really matter. We think, oh, it's down by the ocean. It's not. It's right in the downtown. Have found them out in the conservation zone. Doesn't really matter at this point. So it's definitely something we need to keep our eye on.
I suppose the practical thing would be, like you said, for code enforcement, require that any ADU, if it's going to be rented out, has at least a year lease or something, though, because I foresee a situation where if you build an ADU for an elderly relative and they pass, all of a sudden you're sitting there with a potential revenue source that's just going to seed. Now, obviously, we don't want people just coming through back and forth, especially if we have a housing situation and that someone could live there. So by requiring at least a year lease, though, you're at least requiring somebody out there to actually have a place to live for a year if they want to continue living there, as opposed to becoming a vacational sort of a thing, though. I think that'd be a practical way to approach this, though, because obviously I don't want to hamstrung anybody who wants to rent it out, but at the same time, they still want to make use of it, though, but obviously don't want it to become a de facto sort of vacation thing. So obviously it has to be, has to lean a little bit towards, benefiting the homeowner, but because at the same time, mean, if they get somebody and they're only going to stay for 9 months, well, we know how a rent is. Okay, then you have to pay the rest of the penalty or something. So at least to make it practical, for the person who actually owns the structure.
I believe our ordinance does have a provision about not having a short-term rental for ADUs, but I can certainly check into it and respond.
I was just going to respond to that, just to say that the purpose of this, LD 2003 is to increase affordable housing, and moving units to the short-term rental market actually has the opposite effect. It drives up rents and decreases the amount of available housing. And so I think it behooves us in compliance with this to really put some regulations on short-term rental uses. Not that they should be prohibited citywide, but we should think about how we do it, where we do it, how much we do it, whether we want to license them and regulate them. But to put them into regular housing makes perfect sense, because that's exactly what increases the affordable housing.
To your point, go ahead, Phil.
Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, thanks. I was going to say, to your point, to Councilor Berman's, if we want to have, if folks are concerned about ADUs springing up everywhere in the city, then it behooves us, like you said, to actually look at a long-term plan for affordable housing in the places that you pointed out on the ward map, though, where they would actually be practical, because you would have compact places where people could live, and you could build sort of, not like, similar to what Scarborough Downs is doing, though, like a new community in walkable distance, have it compact and have it make sense in terms of the layout of the city, as opposed to, as I said, waking up in Ward 6 or Ward 4 and all of a sudden having ADUs on your back door that are perfectly legal now, whether you like them or not, though. I mean, if folks are concerned about that going forward, then it is practical for us to actually tackle what we can in terms of inviting Biddeford Housing, the Vesta, any of those type of organizations to invest in Saco in the space that we have, because the alternative is just, as I said, it's going to might give people headaches, though. At the end of the day, I want people to have a place to live, and I am sympathetic to a point when it comes to folks and, being concerned about ADUs, though. But if we can get actual long-term affordable housing, which is, more space to live in, more compact community, and just grows our city in a practical place where we actually have more of a sense of community, I think that would be a practical long-term solution, though. And obviously, going on that map, though, having it on the Route 1 corridor when you're on the bus route, the easy in and out of the city, though, I think would be the most practical way going forward. Like I said, and it would alleviate concerns of ADUs all of a sudden showing up in compacted residential areas and impacting those, though, because we obviously know anybody who ever tries to get a contract zone in those areas invariably meet neighbors that complain about traffic and whatnot. And of course, they don't have a leg to stand on now with this law, so we might as well approach this proactively, and it's going to end up giving more people more places to live in the places that make sense. And I think that'd be practical long-term for us.
Emily, I got a couple of comments for you, if I could. First of all, I want to go on record in support of some of my fellow councilors' comments. I think Councilor Berman mentioned the pace of growth, and you and I have had this conversation. We're going to grow. I just want to make sure that we grow in a way that we don't become too burdensome to our infrastructure and pace it as best we can. So that's important to me. It's interesting, the ADU discussion, it's clear to me that as you're trying to help us comply with LD 2003, we're going to push you into other areas of that zoning ordinance, and it's not a bad thing. So I think we can tie up those loose ends, because I am equally concerned about the short-term rental situation. I think we can probably come up with some sensible rules, but my greater concern is monitoring and compliance, and we can figure out what department that's going to be put in, but the actual practical aspects of documentation and reviewing documents, and how do you keep an eye on things, and are we going to require licenses? I don't know what the answer is, but it can get pretty complicated, but we can't be we can't be not moving forward because of the complications. So the compliance component in short-term rental is important to me as well. Glad that traffic study is on your radar screen. I think it's a very valuable tool that we need, particularly if our goal is to try to figure out a fair and reasonable impact fee. So I'm very supportive of that. I also would suggest that we seem to, maybe it's my imagination, we seem to sometimes forget about the school impact. And you and I have had this conversation as well. I think we need to develop a little bit more of a focus here as we build, you know, the housing stock in our community. There's no doubt that hopefully it will, because we want a community that has families and children. So I don't think we should poo-poo that. I sometimes hear rebuttals about declining school enrollment, and I'm not denying that statistically the average household is shrinking. All right, so that contributes to the decline. But when you start adding more units, I don't think that logic holds. I think that we may have a lower per household number of children, but we're going to have more households. So I think that we need to keep that sort of on the radar screen. And the last comment I had, and it's more of a question, and I think I saw a partial, maybe a complete answer to it in the most recent version of LD 2003. Thanks for sharing that with me. I've always wondered about the subdivision deed restrictions and whether or not those trump the affordable housing in terms of ADUs and all that stuff. And I seem to have read in the latest and greatest version that there was some indication that they do, but I'm not clear on that. So whether you clarify it now or later, you know, I think, because I have constituents who have deed restrictions in their subdivisions, and so consequently they're gonna be asking me, you know, does that mean that I don't have the protections that I thought I had when I bought the property?
We can get an answer for you on that specific question. I do know that, as far as what I know right now, the law does protect deed restrictions and covenants. You probably read that, so we would just need to get clarity on that.
Okay. And then the enforcement of that as well. It's the other issue with any deed. It doesn't even have to be affordable housing, but any deed restriction, who enforces that? I suspect you have to complain to the code enforcement office, who would then pull the deed and see the restriction. I really don't know the answer to the question, so.
That's a good question. It actually recently came up. So on deed restrictions that are required by the city through the condition of approval process, we regulate those and follow up on them after approval. If they are deed restrictions put on by the developer, not by the city, we do not regulate them. And if somebody wants to have something enforced upon, it's a civil matter between parties.
It's a fair answer, thank you.
Can you talk about how these density changes, both affordable housing and the multiple lots on one, multiple units on one lot, and the accessory dwelling units overlay with some of our like coastal waters, and you know, and like on the beachfront where we have really dense housing, but we also can't attach new units to sewers, and there's some building restrictions there. Just is there, how do those two things go together?
Yeah, so we will continue with our resource protection permitting. So I think the Coastal Development Overlay District, I'm not sure if that's the one you're referencing, but it has a 40% coverage. That would still be in effect. So if somebody wants to put an additional dwelling unit within the structure that exists, maybe they can figure out how to do that, but they would still be bound by the 40% coverage in that area for CDOD. If only 20% of the lot is covered now, they could come in potentially to get building permits to add to the structure, as long as they stay within the 40% coverage requirement.
And then I know down in that area, there's also some limitations on connecting new units to the sewer. That's come up recently because of some EPA money we accepted. How do accessory dwelling units count towards that? Do you know?
So the limitation on sewer connections was relative to a federal grant to run sewer extension in that area. We've recently been told as of 2022 that that no longer applies. Obviously, we would not want additional development in the floodplain area, so we would probably encourage or figure out how to encourage people to build onto structures that already exist rather than building structures in the floodplain. And if they do build structures in the floodplain, they would have to meet the freeboard that the city of Saco has, which is higher than in other development areas.
Thank you.
And they would still need to meet the setbacks for single-family residential dwellings.
Jody, can I chime in? Can I chime in?
Yes, you.
Okay. Jumping back to Joe's comments about leases and 12-month periods, I just wanted to share my perspective since I spend every day trying to help people find housing. I envision these ADUs that are going to come as transitional, and whether that's someone is moving into Maine and they need a place to stay while they're looking for a house, or they've sold their house, they need a place to stay before they go to the next place. Most of the rental inquiries that I get, and most of my clients that are still living with their parents or staying somewhere temporarily with friends or family, need rentals that are less than 12 months. Sometimes it's 2 months, sometimes it's 5 months, it's all over the place. And the 12-month requirement at a lot of, buildings and apartments really kind of ties them back, and it forces us into a position where potentially first-time buyers are looking at a lease period of 12 months, knowing they're starting their search, and they think, well, what if we find a house month 6, and then our landlord does try to make us liable for the rest of that lease, then they suddenly can't afford the house.
Yeah.
So I would say if there's any sort of minimum requirement, I would say even shrinking it back to like 90 days would make sense, because there's such a wide range of need out there for the length of rentals.
I think that would be prudent in the sense of that it wouldn't be treated as a vacation home, though, because,
Right.
and even if it is a vacation home, effectively at that, though, yeah, maybe you have a student, or maybe you have somebody who's a seasonal worker or something, and they 9 months out of the year, but then maybe they go back to visit their folks in Kentucky for the summer, and then you can rent it out for 3 months, and it's not the same thing as an Airbnb. Yeah, I have no problem with that, though. I understand people's concerns about this influx of Airbnbs and the inability to effectively, or at least the perception, the inability to police that. But at the same time, since we're not getting this huge influx of Airbnbs yet, though, I don't see it as a huge problem, although to Councilor Johnson's point, I do see some regulation as practical, because we don't want to lose any potential living spaces to people that are just going to, use it as a vacation home. But no, I appreciate that point, though, and I think that's a prudent one, because I would, lower the lowest possible term on the rent, the better, though. I've lived in my apartment 14 years now, and it's month by month, though. So but not everyone's me, though. So what are you going to do, right?
Yeah.
If I can interject here as well. So when the city redid certain sections of the ordinance, one thing we spent a lot of time on was talking about accessory dwelling units. We met with Jean Saunders of Age Friendly and got her perspective on how we help people age in place. So one of the provisions put into our newer accessory dwelling unit, section 230-701, already says that no ADU may be rented on less than a monthly basis. So I think we're already covered with short-term rentals and ADUs. And then it goes on to say short-term rentals of ADUs of less than 1 month in duration are prohibited. So I think that clause covers us as far as the concerns I'm hearing around the table. It does not mean that we should not review our short-term rental ordinance holistically for the city, but a lot of the ADU provisions of the law are already allowed throughout the city. So I think it would be helpful for me working with the city, through the city administrator, to provide some information on what specific zones will be affected by ADUs. You may find that perhaps your zone in your ward is not affected as much as you may think it is.
I was just going to add that I would agree that we currently have the protections on the ADUs, but if you're looking at adding up to 3 additional units plus an ADU in these areas, those units, there's nothing that prevents those units today in any zone from being rented as a short term, and that's what's occurring. And that's my larger concern is, we're adding additional units, whether they're ADUs or just regular housing units, and they are being rented in a way that I think conflicts with the intent of the law. So I still think that we need to take a look at how to prevent that. We currently have something on the books for the coastal area, but it only applies down there, and I think that we should have something, we should pretty much zone where we want short-term rentals and have them where they're, where we don't desire them, would be what I would suggest. Thank you.
Well, and permitting and licensing of short-term rentals could pay for its own enforcement, and that would become the benefit. Right, and that there's some life safety implications there also if the units aren't safe. There's some real, I think, work that we should do there over the long term.
On the Airbnbs, I just want to add also, in talking to code enforcement, I mean, there's kind of two camps here with them. There's the renting of the entire unit or house. Then there's also about half of them we have where they're just a guest in someone's house. They're in a bedroom, or they're literally a guest in the same unit as the occupant. So I think there's kind of two different models out there, and I guess, a registration or, process would have to be different based on what exactly they're doing, whether it's they're renting an entire unit or they're really having someone as a guest in their home.
So this brings up the question is like how progressive, how proactive does Saco want to be? When I look at other cities, when they bring in affordable housing, they always put limitations on the developer. For example, if you build this ADU, again, they get credits. Do we want to be as progressive where we actually try to encourage this type of growth? And by doing that, we then can control the outcomes within reason. If we were to provide a tax credit for affordable housing that would go to long-term rentals, housing, to help add to our capacity, and thus hopefully reducing the cost of rent, if we offered to the developer, and that could be a single person, it doesn't have to be a company, it could just be someone who owns property and adds an ADU, and you tell the city that it will be a long-term rental for 5, 10 years, it's arbitrary right now in that amount of time. Is that an approach we want to do in which we encourage developers, and again, single-family individuals who want to create an ADU, and put some rules attached to it? Give them a credit. If they provide the housing the way that the city of Saco and our housing committees, the city staff one, the council-related housing committee, the long-term planning committee, if it's all within the vision of what Saco identifies, is it worth giving them a credit in order to create additional housing, apartments, ADUs? That then would give us the, again, put in a penalty if you break it. I know a lot of the housing in Portland, it's $100-something thousand. You get fined if you don't agree. I wouldn't say that that's appropriate for our case, but a discussion, is it worth looking into offering credits to create the housing, to try to entice it, try to steer away from Airbnbs and things like that? Is that worth something that Saco is willing to consider, is that we help chip in the cost to affordable housing in Saco?
I think that might be one of the items to look at as far as the housing committee Brian is putting together. I think it's already on the list. I think it's a good point.
But I think that would be a powerful tool for helping encourage growth in some regions, not others. It wouldn't have to be for affordable housing. It could be for affordable housing in certain districts or in certain zones, which could help guide that type of development as well as encouraging it, which I think would make it a very powerful and useful tool.
Emily, is this on? Emily, I don't want to, it feels like we're kind of creating a little bit of gray area here, right? An accessory dwelling unit, you're allowed one, right? We're not to be confused, we got multiple accessory dwelling units. Once we're beyond an accessory dwelling unit, we're into multifamily. And that, where this LD 2003 is kind of addressing both, it's the affordable
multifamily component, that's a little bit separate, right? I mean, not to-
Somewhat.
They're somewhat separate, and that's, meaning we can't, out in North Saco, we can't have multiple dwelling, we can't have 4 ADUs on one property or anything like that. That's not what we're saying here.
So in growth areas, the new law would allow you to have up to 4 dwelling units. In areas that are not designated growth, you would still get, I believe it's up to 2. So like North Saco, a lot of those areas would probably get up to 2, maybe with an ADU.
Right.
So you'd have to prove that you have wastewater capacity and well capacity to handle those new units.
Yeah, that's the one exception, so we might want to look at that differently now. But then, I think to Counselor Berman's point and to Counselor Archer's point, some other towns require, if you build over 10, or 10 dwelling units, you must have 10, 15, 25% of them being affordable. You started the conversation, is that something we want to do? And then additionally, where we must allow and designate areas for this density bonus, it says we can't change the zoning or the dimensional standards, but does it prohibit us to require more green space or solar or higher energy efficient buildings, or not to, I guess just for discussion, be a little bit opposite of Counselor Archer, to either provide more direction? Are we trying to encourage the affordable housing, and to what capacity, or in what zones, or do we want to just allow it and see what happens, or?
Well, that's the great thing with
That's-
credits, is you can design how the credit is given. So you could again, this is all for discussion purposes at the moment, but yeah, you could put other parameters on it.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm alluding to. It seems to me there's an opportunity to, have this and create additional benefit to the city.
Well, you
More
can-
green space, solar, high energy efficient buildings.
You can maximize your potential by making the footprint smaller. And if it's out in my ward, in Ward 3, though, there's nothing really else around, though, you could make things slightly higher, though, because you're going to preserve more green space out there. That's not like building a 4 or 5-story thing in somebody's neighborhood, though, because there literally is no neighborhood out there. It is Route 1 and anything that's off Route 1, though. So any potential zoning prohibitions on that pre-exist would have to be looked at the planning board level for the simple, or at the council level, for the simple reason that if they run contrary to the spirit of us maximizing our investment of affordable housing, and also being in compliance with the law, that'd have to be done away with, though. But again, with our zoning, in the practical places where it makes sense, though. So if we're trying to maximize our potential, we're not doing it in areas that don't make any sense, though. We're essentially trying to build up the parts of the city that have been underutilized and that could be, have the most benefit, though, to your point, though. Like I said, we would have to just go through the books and see, what parts of our zoning run contrary to that. Otherwise, it's going to become sort of a game of pass the potato, though, where it's like, well, we can't do it down on the coast because we have coastal regulations. We can't do it here because we have covenants. And then it's just going to become this round robin thing, though. And at the end of the day, we're still going to have to do something. And if it ends up in the worst possible way, then no one's happy.
Yeah, and it's direction. That's always what it is, especially from a developer. It's always direction. Free-for-all doesn't help anybody. And then to Councilor McPhail's point about the historic, component, if this falls in the historic zone, can we, if you add a second-story addition to a historic structure or a structure within the historic zone, can we implement a design element that sets that work, 10 feet back from the street face, sort of things like that. So just additional direction is, I know there's a lot here, there's a lot to think about, and I guess I'm just saying there's a lot more.
I think those are the exact right questions to be asking. And just some of the ways I'm thinking about it is this bill, as I understand it, there's 2 different things that we want to consider, right? One is it encourages affordable housing growth, And I'm all for that. I think that's really important. And so I want to say, yes, I want Saco to be in, and I want it to be progressive, to address Councilor Archer's point. But the other thing I think it does is it prohibits our ability to control some things, right? For example, you were talking about one ADU, but actually I think it allows up to 2 ADUs in any existing house and up to 4 units, even in a single-family lot right now that's unbuilt, and it prohibits us from stopping that. And so the question is, how do we manage some of those prohibitions also? And that's where I thought Councilor Archer's point was maybe attractive, in that although we can't prohibit that, we can encourage it in certain places where it's desirable. And that's another area of guidance that I think council and the planning board would really be encouraged to provide some guidance. So for example, that would fundamentally change the character of some neighborhoods if you suddenly tripled the number of dwelling units in those locations. In other places, we actually would want that and encourage that to occur. And so because we can't prohibit it, but we do want to guide it, how do we encourage it? And so I think that's where some of those credits and ideas might come in also. So yes, we want affordable housing, but we don't want our right to kind of guide some of that development necessarily taken away. And so by using some of your tools and some of planning's tools and some of council's tools, can we provide some guidance to developers where we want it, right? You can do it anywhere, but we're going to give you a 20% tax credit if you do it here. You can do it anywhere, but if you do it in already sewered land, in places that we've targeted for high growth, in places where we think the road capacity can do it, and you make it affordable, we're going to give you a 50% tax credit. I think that was Councilor Archer's idea, and I think right along with what you're saying is I think that it's a yes and. We want to mitigate the impacts of taking that authority away from us while also encouraging that affordable housing growth.
Yeah, I agree. Those are good points. And then I think what we don't want to do is have every developer come in and make every project affordable. I think that's what it seems like a lot of the questions are revolving. And I don't suspect every developer would do that, but I guess I'm calling it a free-for-all, is just making sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I think some of the impacts of this ordinance are to encourage affordable housing, which is maybe why some of the conversation is centered around that.
Correct. I think one of the examples is Portland, for example. It's at 10. I do a lot of them. And a lot of developers build 10. And if they build 11, they pay, it's $100,000. They pay the $100,000. They're looking to, developers in that area are trying not to do affordable. Portland's trying to push affordable. And then when developers do affordable, they're building 70, 80, 100 units, as we're seeing here. There's one in Portland, there's one across the bridge there. So I think that's what, I guess, what we're seeing. Excuse me, what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't agree more with your thoughts.
But again, providing these credits to the individual, the landowner, not talking to this level at scale, because that's how they're able to offset that cost, is that they're building at scale. But if you're talking 10 owners throughout 10 different properties or spread out among the city, that's not as noticeable. It's 10 more units, but it's so spread out that you can't even see it. Even if 100 individuals throughout the city scattered it all around, I don't even know if we'd recognize it, to be honest. But we were talking about affordable, and one of the things I do not like about ordinance that say affordable, it doesn't define it. And that'd be one of the things that I'd like to really delve into. What does that mean? I've been a big fan of how HUD works and how they say it's always in a percentage of the AMI, because the AMI changes. And when you do a percentage of the AMI, that's what determines what affordable housing is. And if there was an ordinance about defining what affordable housing is, I think it should be definitely defined to something 30%, 40%. We can figure out, could be 50, 60, I'm just bringing up a point here, but connect it to the AMI, because then that allows for the market to grow and shrink, and that number can change. You don't have to keep on making ordinances over ordinances to apply it.
It's in the LD
Yeah.
2003.
It is connected, okay.
Yeah.
30% of a household monthly income, 80% of median income for the area.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Also, too, to answer your question, rulemaking is defining how much a majority means. So you could have affordable housing projects that have 51% affordable units, So right now, the language in rulemaking is just a majority of units,
Well,
more than
that's-
half.
The thing is, if you apply credit to the single individual, 100% of the units would have to be affordable because it's one unit. So to make sure that it's well-defined before a credit is given.
I think there's a lot to think about here, and I appreciate all the feedback. Happy to answer any more questions. There's going to be more questions than answers, I think, until the state finishes their rulemaking process. So what we can do is plan to answer some of the questions we have here and keep moving forward with analyzing what ordinance amendments are needed as we go forward.
And I might encourage the city administrator to populate our workshop agenda as you get, enough information that you're worthy to come back so we can kind of keep this on track. I think we need to be very sensitive to time issues here, so.
Okay, any other additional questions or comments? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate the update.
Listen, Matt, thanks for giving up your evening. We appreciate that.
Okay, next up on the workshop, we've got council goal setting exercise. Yep. Sure. Weird. I did. You did, well, we were at a concert, yeah.
Are they getting this handout? Okay. Is that coming back
When
up?
you are.
It will not? So we're just on this one? Okay, all right. All right, well, welcome to council goals setting session 2023. You should all have this handout in front of you here, and then you'll see the screen. We have this screen up over here. So we took the process that we had to use the past couple of years, the prioritization grid, and tried to make it a little bit more user-friendly. There was some feedback that looking at the giant grid was a little bit cumbersome, especially for the public trying to follow along. And so Glennis and Emily and I sat down and developed, I think, of a bit of a new and improved process, still using elements of that same exercise, but making it a little more user-friendly and easy to follow. So Glennis, do you want to say a little bit more about the process you used to develop this new prioritization?
Sure, yep. So the fundamental concept around the prioritization exercise that council has engaged in has to do with taking a number of different goals or focus areas and then voting them against each other one at a time. So it sort of allows, on an iterative basis, to understand what does rise to the top for the council in terms of priority. This is the same process. The difference is that rather than having sort of a confusing grid, we've just created these sets. So we'll work through each set. Emily's going to read the two options in each set. Each council member will raise their hand for the option that they believe is the better one. Will you read it once and then once to vote?
Yes, so I'll read the set once, and then I'll read each item individually for your vote.
And then Brian and I will tabulate. The winner of each set will be scored with a 1. And then as we work through each of the sets, you'll be able to see with the goals at the top of the screen which one is sort of rising to the top. So the goals at the top of the screen are just that summary focus area for the goal. And this is ordered the way it was when we did the last prioritization exercise. So the order may change depending on how council feels about these goals and focus areas based on changing circumstances over the last year.
I totally understand the process, that makes sense. But I do have two questions. One is, what happens to these goals? We set them, and then what happens next? Where do they guide the city? Where do they guide the budgeting process? Where do they guide the work we do? And then the second question is, do we ever have accountability? So I've been through this a couple of times. And where does our progress on the goals come back and get reported? And how does that inform kind of an iterative process?
Yeah, so obviously, they are posted on the website for the public to view, and they're a statement of, where our goals are. Also, if you remember during the budget process, like Glennis does a nice job of fitting in where our priorities sort of lie in regards to budget and how those two things sort of mesh so people can see where we're sort of putting our resources based on our goals. So there is that piece. I would add, though, I would agree with, I think, where you're going with your question, in that I don't think we maybe in many ways hold ourselves accountable enough for these goals that we set out at the beginning of the year. And should there be more benchmarks or more sort of standards that we look at down the road of are we meeting things, I think that could be another piece of this process. But I think we do a pretty good job with the budget process of showing where we are in meeting these goals as far as our city resources, which is obviously the biggest way we can demonstrate how we're meeting our goals. But I think what you're getting at as far as further benchmarks may be a good conversation for us to have. And so this process will do the prioritization tonight, but we'll come back at a future regular council meeting to discuss and then formally adopt our goals. So maybe at that next meeting when we formally adopt our goals, that's a good juncture to talk about more in the way of accountability.
Yeah, that'd be great. And maybe just a suggestion for future years, too late now, but before we adopt the goals for next year, we should revisit our progress on the goals from this year. And that may help inform where we rank and things that may move down because we've achieved them, things may move up because we haven't, and that'll help provide some feedback in that way also.
I would add that a subjective review from the staff, halfway through the year would make some sense, because if you think about it, I mean, when we were presented with the city administrator's budget, everything's been vetted, but then we have the right to basically increase or decrease monies based on our own personal judgment. However, you tend to make those decisions in the moment based on the individual issue, and not sort of these overall goals, though. So it'd be kind of nice to sort of, we do the job that we're supposed to do, but then sit back and have someone say, oh, by the way, last 6 months, because of the decisions you've made, this has now gone up, this has gone down, is this where you want to be going in terms of your priorities? Because it basically allows us to, it's almost like a lighthouse, it allows us to sort of see where we are overall in terms of how we're governing, because like I was telling someone earlier, though, our body is set up to be more reactive than proactive. That's just the way the city council is designed. So in order to even give this some more proactive weight, we have to be being directed in the sense of where we are in terms of the priorities, even if there isn't something in front of us that's going to cause one to go over the other, just so we know in the back of our head. Otherwise, this becomes more of a statement of policy positions, though, that doesn't really impact our day-to-day actions on actual actionable items, though. So that, as a constructive criticism, I think going forward, it'd be prudent to give this a little bit more weight vis-a-vis what we actually do.
Emily, can you correct me if I'm wrong? Didn't you used to provide us an update, or a staff member did?
So if you
It was under
recall,
old council.
during the budget process, each departmental presentation and their departmental narratives in the budget book, we do tie back to the council goals. So we also have been trying to use a more consistent narrative with departments of reflecting back on these goals for the annual report as well. So those are a few different documents where you'll see departments reporting in on their accomplishments in each of these areas.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Okay, anything else before we get started? All right, we have 37 sets, so Emily, get reading.
All right, I apologize in advance, you have to listen to me for a while. So we'll start with set 1, and what I'll do is just read the focus area, which are the first few words instead of the entire goal, since people at home can follow along on the screen, and you each have this in front of you, just so this doesn't take us all night. So set 1 is you are looking at financial stability and schools and infrastructure. So between those two, how many people are voting for financial stability? And schools and infrastructure.
So just to clarify, because I just had a question from Emily, it's a winner-take-all, so financial stability won that round, 6-1, and so I've scored set number 1 with a 1 for financial stability and a 0 for schools and infrastructure.
Set 2 is financial stability and economic opportunity. Financial stability. Economic opportunity. Set 3, financial stability and growth and innovation. Financial stability. Growth and innovation.
Oh, sorry, I see, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. We can do that.
Yeah, so financial stability takes that round.
Set 4, financial stability and governance. Financial stability and governance.
And financial stability takes that round.
Financial stability and transparency and engagement, that's set 5. Financial stability. Transparency and engagement.
And financial stability takes that round.
Set 6, financial stability and livable community. Financial stability. Livable community.
And financial stability takes that round.
Set 7, financial stability and environmental sustainability. Financial stability, environmental sustainability.
And financial stability takes that round.
Set 8, financial stability and organizational excellence. Financial stability. Organizational excellence.
And financial stability takes that round.
Set 9, schools and infrastructure and economic opportunity. Schools and infrastructure. Economic opportunity.
And schools and infrastructure takes that round.
Set 10, schools and infrastructure and growth and innovation. Schools and infrastructure. And growth and innovation.
And schools and infrastructure takes that round.
We're now on set 11, schools and infrastructure and governance. Schools and infrastructure. Governance.
And schools and infrastructure takes that round.
Set 12, schools and infrastructure and transparency and engagement. Schools and infrastructure.
And schools and infrastructure takes that round.
Set 13, schools and infrastructure and livable community. Schools and infrastructure. Livable community.
And schools and infrastructure takes that round.
Set 14, schools and infrastructure and environmental sustainability. Schools and infrastructure. Environmental sustainability.
And schools and infrastructure takes that round.
Set 15, schools and infrastructure and organizational excellence. Schools and infrastructure. Organizational excellence.
And schools and infrastructure takes that round.
Set 16, economic opportunity and growth and innovation. Economic opportunity. Growth and innovation.
And economic opportunity takes that round.
Set 17, economic opportunity and governance. Economic opportunity. Governance.
And economic opportunity takes that round.
Set 18, economic opportunity, transparency and engagement. Economic opportunity. Transparency and engagement.
And economic opportunity takes that round.
Set 19, economic opportunity, livable community. Economic opportunity. Livable community.
And economic opportunity takes that round.
Set 20, economic opportunity, environmental sustainability. Economic opportunity. Environmental sustainability.
And economic opportunity takes that round.
Set 21, economic opportunity and organizational excellence. Economic opportunity. Organizational excellence.
And economic opportunity takes that round.
Set 22, growth and innovation and governance. Growth and innovation. Governance.
Growth and innovation takes that round.
Set 23, growth and innovation and transparency and engagement. Growth and innovation. Transparency and engagement.
And growth and innovation takes that round.
Set 24, growth and innovation and livable community. Growth and innovation. Livable community.
And growth and innovation takes that round.
Set 25, growth and innovation and environmental sustainability. Growth and innovation. Environmental sustainability.
And growth and innovation takes that round.
Set 26, growth and innovation and organizational excellence. Growth and innovation. Organizational excellence.
And growth and innovation takes that round.
Set 27, governance and transparency and engagement. Governance. Transparency and engagement.
And governance takes that round.
Set 28, governance, livable community. Governance. Livable community.
And livable community takes that round.
Set 29, governance and environmental sustainability. Governance. Environmental sustainability.
Governance takes that round.
Set 30, governance and organizational excellence. Governance. Organizational excellence.
Governance takes that round.
Set 31, governance and financial stability. Governance. Financial stability.
Financial stability takes that round.
Set 32, transparency and engagement and livable community. Transparency and engagement. Livable community.
And livable community takes that round.
Set 33, transparency and engagement and environmental sustainability. Transparency and engagement. Environmental sustainability.
Environmental sustainability takes that round.
Set 34, transparency and engagement and organizational excellence. Transparency and engagement. Organizational excellence.
Transparency and engagement takes that round.
Set 35, livable community or environmental sustainability. Livable community. Environmental sustainability.
Livable community takes that round.
Set 36, livable community or organizational excellence. Livable community. Organizational excellence.
Livable community takes that round.
Set 37, environmental sustainability or organizational excellence. Environmental sustainability. Organizational excellence.
And environmental sustainability takes that round.
So also, unlike past years, we have the results tabulated in real time this year. So there's no 15-minute intermission in the back room.
And so it appears that we do have a three-way tie between financial stability, schools and infrastructure, and economic opportunity. Would the council like to further prioritize between those three?
Or maybe it's time for discussion.
We could have a moment of discussion.
I don't see a problem with having all three at the top. I mean, truth be told, every year we do this, and I mean, every one of these subjects is important, and honestly, you can't have, you can't have some of these without the others. I mean, I'm going to take, set 35, for example. It's livable community and environmental sustainability kind of go hand in hand. So I don't see a problem with having three tied for the #1 position.
And the good news is we don't have to worry about organizational excellence, right?
I'm going to worry about that.
Well, that's a good point, because, it's important, but it's like in the grander scheme of things, I don't think we should downplay its importance, but obviously in this ranking,
Well, and to be honest, at least in my mind, one of the reasons I voted was for where I feel like we've made a lot of progress, right? So I feel like we've actually made a lot of progress in organizational excellence over the last couple of years, and therefore it's less of an urgent priority right now.
I was just kidding.
Yeah, whereas, right.
We'll take compliments.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you can think about goals in different ways. One is their importance, but also is the urgency of the need today to work on those things. And so, yeah.
Excellent.
I got you were
excellent
joking,
point.
but I also want to say part of that is just a job well done.
That's an excellent point.
So, like I said, from here, we will have this back at a regular council meeting for discussion and actual adoption. And then, maybe we could also talk about some additional ways of keeping this on the front burner. We don't lose track of this. These were good points made about what we do as far as the budget process. And we do, I think, put it out there as much as we can to the public, that this is what we stand for the coming year. We can certainly have a discussion how we can even more so keep this in front of us as much as we can.
Yeah, and I appreciate the reminders for where it does come up. That was helpful.
Thank you to Glennis and Emily for assisting in this process. I thought it was particularly smooth this year. With the live tabulation, and Emily, excellent, reading of the sets. So, thank you guys.
Great, thank
I
you.
thought it was at a boxing match because we were telling who won each round. I didn't know what was going on there.
Like a total knockout, right? Okay, I guess that concludes the workshop for the evening. First workshop.